I was a Baha'i for many years. And so Christ came back into my life in a way, but not really, because they don't have a concept of the Trinity. I saw the statue there and I went out to pray to Mary. I just was like, Mary, I don't know what's going on. I realized I needed to have God in my life in a different way. I love the visuals in the church, and I love the incense, and I love what they call smells and bells and all that stuff. Be content with the anxieties of today, because tomorrow will take care of itself. There's enough to handle today.
Today, I'll be talking with Karen McAleece about her journey to Orthodoxy. I know her as Mary because that is the name she took at her chrismation on the Feast of the Annunciation in 2023. Karen grew up in New Jersey in a loving family of 9, mom, dad, and 7 children, all raised in the Catholic faith. After high school, she entered the convent. All she wanted to do was serve God as a nun, but apparently he had other plans. She'll explain. Eventually, Karen moved to California. She married Jim McAleece in 1977, and they have 3 sons. Justin and Ian live in Fresno. Andrew is in heaven. She has 2 stepchildren, Tim and Lynn. Karen went back to school to Fresno State and received her teaching credentials and a master's in early childhood education. She retired from the Bass Lake School District in 2008 after 20 years. She still lives in North Fork, California, after 50 years with her husband. She has had an interesting spiritual journey and considers the search for truth one of the most central motivating principles of her life. She is looking forward to sharing that journey as we talk today. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Hi, Hafti. How are you?
Doing good. Glory to God. Who is a saint you find to be a role model in your life, and why?
Well, I'm very attached to the Theotokos, to Mary. That's why I took my name. So I know we don't always think of her just as a saint, but I'd have to say she's primary in my life. And that's why I had my chrismation on the Annunciation, and I turned to her for prayer every day. And so that's a very important saint in my life. And then there's also Saint Porphyrios. Lately, I've been reading a book called Wounded by Love, and he has such wonderful spiritual words and images, and just a love of Christ that just comes across to me as really wonderful spiritual connection. So I like him a lot too. But Mary's number one.
Yeah. What led you to being inspired by Mary? What stood out to you?
That's a great story, I'll tell you. I was raised a Catholic, as you mentioned, so we do have a devotion to the Blessed Mother, or Mary, the Mother of God, different names. Never Theotokos. I don't think I knew that name very well at all growing up. And in the convent, I don't think it ever came across my mind. I was Catholic until I moved out to California after I was in the convent, right? And then they kicked me out, sort of. I had some knee problems from a basketball injury, and I had a couple of surgeries while I was in the convent. And they thought maybe I wouldn't be able to physically do the life of a nun in their order, so they asked me to leave in 1965. I was in the novitiate, they call it, but then I was asked to leave that, and I was brokenhearted. And I came back 2 years later. They had a different head novice and stuff, and different people in charge, and for some reason they said I could come back, so I did. And when I came back, that was right around what they call Vatican II in the Catholic Church. A lot of upheaval, a lot of things changed, and so I went to school at St. Peter's in Jersey City and became I learned theology and philosophy is what I majored in. I was going to teach adult catechism classes, basically. I am getting to Mary. Okay. So then, after a few years, because of the upheaval, that was probably one of the biggest times of upheaval in the Catholic Church, I became friends with people that were pretty much on the more radical side of, looking at things differently, the Berrigan brothers and things you wouldn't understand because you're too young, but there was a lot going on. And eventually in 1970, I was sent down to teach religion in a school in Southern California, in a high school. I mean, not California, New Jersey, Southern Jersey. And after a year of that, I just felt I couldn't stay any longer. I just really wanted to leave. And my parents had moved to California with some of my siblings, and my dad was having some health problems, so I kind of justified it in my head that I was going to go help with him. And that's true to an extent, but my mom was taking care of that. But I needed to just leave. And so I came out to California in the 70s. So that's where this thing with Mary starts, because in a way, picture being in a convent after 12 years of Catholic education and then coming to California in the early 70s. It was really a tempting time to do things that I had never done and get involved in just in a culture that was new and exciting, but sort of frightening too. And I just sort of, I guess I'd say, lost my faith. I just, all of a sudden, I didn't really believe in what I believed in before. And so...
How did that happen?
I don't know exactly. It's just that you start doing things that aren't Catholic or Christian, and you have some marijuana, or you do something that you shouldn't do, or live a life you shouldn't be living, and you just start to normalize it because everybody's doing it. And so it just kind of took me off my moorings. I just didn't have the same connection to, and plus I was a little annoyed about the Catholic Church going one way and the influences I had going another. Everybody I read, all the theologians I read were, you're not supposed to read. You know what I mean? I was just kind of rebellious. And so eventually I think I just couldn't make head or tails of it, so I just kind of drifted away. And that was for some years until I met some people that were Baha'is. Have you heard of the Baha'i Faith before?
I don't know much, but I hope to ask you a bit about
It's very wonderful in many respects, and through the Baha'i Faith, I connected to God again. That's why I loved it. They have prayers, they have readings, and everything, and Christ is involved in a sense because the Baha'is believe that all of the prophets and the teachers from God over the centuries are in a string called the word just went on my head, but I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, that they're all teachers of who God is, and that God is predominant, and the latest teacher is called Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. And the Baha'is recognize Christ as one of the major teachers. They call the word manifestation, and it would be like Abraham and Moses and Christ and Muhammad. And the way I understood it was that the spiritual laws and the spiritual communication from God is the same throughout history, but the social laws change. And according to whatever cultural time you're in or place on the earth or whatever, that those things change. And they would even include, I mentioned some of the prophets or manifestations, but also Buddha and Krishna, Zoroaster, things like that. So it kind of made sense to me, okay, and this is the latest teacher, and I almost saw Baha'u'llah as Christ again, Christ coming again. Baha'u'llah didn't say he was the only God, but that he was another manifestation.
So who's Baha'u'llah?
Baha'u'llah is the center of the Baha'i Faith, and he says, you know how in the Bible it says that Christ will come again?
Yeah.
Basically saying, that's who I am.
Oh,
I am the fulfillment of Christ, I'm the fulfillment of Muhammad, I'm the fulfillment of Abraham, all of that. And it made enough sense to me after a time to just accept it, and I was a Baha'i for many years, and I never and so Christ came back into my life in a way, but not really, because they don't have a concept of the Trinity, which at that point in my life I wasn't fighting for. You know, I didn't really give one way or the other, didn't think about it. I just knew Baha'u'llah, and the writings were so beautiful, Hapte, and the prayers are so beautiful, and the story behind the faith. It's kind of connected to Islam the way Christianity is connected to Judaism.
Okay.
It happened in Iran and Iraq. Baha'u'llah was from Iran, and it just captured my heart and got me back into a religious frame of mind. And we had a beautiful community up in North Fork, and extended a little bit out to the Madeira community. And I very good moral teachings, and very good acceptance of the fact that we're all one family, that God is our Father, and we're all one family, and probably the biggest call of the Baha'i Faith is unity in the world. So those are all good principles. Men and women are created equal. Science and religion agree. There's just a lot of principles that at the time were just made sense to me. So I became a Baha'i, and once you get ensconced in something like that, and you believe it, and you pray it, and you feel touched by it, I just really never questioned it for many years. I was a Baha'i for many, many years, over 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had some doubts at maybe 20 or 25 years into it, but that was just my life. And I met with the community regularly for, they have, not like we go to church on Sunday, and we did that in the Catholic Church too. They have a feast, they call it, every 19 days. There's 19 months
Every
of
19 days.
every 19 days. So
What's like the significance of 19 days?
19 is a very important number. I guess, I don't know if this is Persian or just, their numbers mean a lot. And there were 19 was just a significant number in the faith. And so there's 19 months of 19 days, and there's a few extra, they call it intercalary days. And this all just spoke to me. It gave me a good basis for raising my children in a spiritual manner. Baha'is don't drink, so I like to drink before that. And all of a sudden, that's not part of my life. So all those years, just, that's it, gave it up. And then I started, actually it was 9/11 that rocked. I was already having some doubts about some things, but 9/11 rocked my faith a lot. And I just started thinking, oh, if religion is this awful that people are killing people in this manner, and of course that's been going on for generations, and I just am not part of it, but all of a sudden
it's like so real.
I'm from New Jersey, so having that happen in New York was really astounding. And I started to question things even more and let things slide, didn't go to things, and just kind of was losing that faith. And then it kind of got resurrected about a year or two later. I talked to some Baha'is, and I felt, well, maybe I just not being a good enough person and a good enough Baha'i. And so I got back into it. But it was never the same, Hafti. I never, that intense love of the faith never really came back. And then I realized that I never withdrew from it, which is what you would have to do formally up until that point, but I just drifted off from it. And that's where Mary comes in. So then I was doing some work called the transformational breathing, kind of a program where you learn how to incorporate breathing in a way that helps you deal with your life and your problems and your difficulties and the good things and all of that. And it really struck a note with me, and I got very involved in that. And there was somebody, we were really, I thought, blessed to have somebody in our town that taught that. And I went to become one of the instructors in a way. I went to classes and learned a lot. And the lady that had the classes, and her husband in North Fork, they had a very wonderful, beautiful place to live, and they had quite a lot of acreage, and on it they had Native American walks, and they had different things, but they also had a statue of the Blessed Mother. And one day, I was still, actually, they had a class, this is just coming, they had a class on grieving, and you would go for 3 or 4 days, and you'd write down what you're grieving over and what was so sad and everything. And I had lost a child, our second son, Andrew, drowned when he was 18 months old, and that had happened quite a long time before that. And when that happened, that is the saddest thing in a way, but to me, he was with God, and I got so much benefit and grace and love from my faith that I felt that reinforced the idea that the Baha'i faith was true, because they have a little quote that says, it's called a hidden word, death, where is thy sting? Why did I grieve? I have made the light to shine on thee its splendor. And I had a picture taken at the funeral of this little 18-month-old, and when I looked at the picture, I actually remember getting these pictures developed and picking them up and saying, God, give me another sign that this is going to be okay. And there was this picture of us standing around his casket with this huge shaft of light coming right down the middle of it. It still gives me goosebumps to think of it. And I thought all I could think of was that quote, "I've made the light to shed on thee its splendor." So I went, all right, I know you're fine, Andrew, you're fine. So that whole thing just endeared me more to the faith, right? And that was in 83. He died in 83. He was born in 82. So that was a long time ago. And so it wasn't until 2001 and the 9/11 and all that I started really drifting away from religion again. So when I went back to this learning this breathing technique, I saw the statue there, and I went out to pray to Mary. I just was like, Mary, I don't know what's going on. And I hadn't really given any thought to the Blessed Mother at all because it wasn't a big figure in the Baha'i faith. But I started saying prayers. I remembered the Hail Mary and the Our Father and said that. And then I was listening to a writer that I like. Her name is Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and I have some of her books, and I had them on audio, and I was listening this whole same time. And at one point, she's a Catholic, which, but weren't Catholic books. She wrote, you're too young to know this, but she wrote a really famous book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And it's all about the mythology of women's stories and all this, and it's quite good. And I was listening to one of her, to a tape of one of her books, and this phrase came out that I had remembered as a kid, and it was called the Memorare. And it says, "Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided." And when I heard those words, I just broke down and sobbed and cried and carried on emotionally. It just touched my heart, and I just wanted to be back with Mary. And somehow I believe that it's my devotion in that moment to Mary and her love for me, as she loves us all, got me somehow to the Orthodox Church. I had no thought of the Orthodox Church at that time. I didn't even know about it. But I ended up there, and I'm going to give credit to the Theotokos. So that's why Mary's my favorite.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's beautiful. How would you say that eventually led you to the Orthodox Church?
So what happened next? Let me think here. I just started a spiritual search. I realized I needed to have God in my life in a different way. I know when we got interrupted, I was talking about the grieving thing. And when I went to do that class about grieving, what I grieved was my loss of God. I had my son die, right? I've told you that story. But that's not what I did my grieving work on. I felt pretty okay about that in terms of the big picture. He's with God. But now I didn't believe in God. So that sounds contradictory, but that's kind of where I was. Like, God, where are you? I don't feel you. I don't sense you. I don't pray to you. I don't love you. I want to fall in love with God again. That was my goal for that series, that workshop. I want to fall in love with God again.
So was it like a lack of, like, you felt like kind of like a lack of like connection rather than a lack of belief that God exists?
Absolutely a lack of connection. And I would say I even thought I used to laugh and say, I'm a Baha'i and I have more books on atheism than just about any Baha'i you would imagine in my mind, because I was exploring that. I read a lot about atheism and agnosticism, and I considered myself an atheist by the end of that time. When I was going to these classes, I didn't have the new atheist movement was about, and I read all those, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and all that, Dan Dennett, and I forget the other one right now. Christopher Hitchens. I'd read all that stuff, and that was my camp now. That's where I was going. So then this other stuff came in, because it's still the big hole in your life when you don't have a connection with God. And I just was searching, and so I explored the Catholic Church. I went to a couple of church services, very uninspiring to me. And then I heard a person named Rod Dreher. He's a writer, and he was being interviewed by Jordan Peterson. I liked Jordan Peterson. I'd gone to see Jordan Peterson speak with family and friends, and Rod Dreher was talking about the Orthodox Church, and he had been Protestant, and then he'd been a Catholic for 10 years or so, and now he was in the Orthodox. And for some reason, that interview, see, this is all God directed, as far as I can tell, but that interview made me go, that sounds kind of cool. So I went to the church down the road, St. Peter's.
St. Peter's.
And while it drew me a little bit, it was off-putting too, just because it was so different. And I just remember telling somebody, well, I checked out Orthodoxy, but I'm checking that off my list.
Yeah.
It didn't work for me. But I made no connection. I didn't talk to anybody. I left early. It just wasn't happening for me. And then my daughter-in-law, Courtney, said, a couple weeks later, I went, oh man, I don't know where I'm going with this. And she said, why don't you try St. George's Orthodox Church? She's not a religious person at all, but she loved the Greek festival, right?
Yeah.
So this time I called up and I got somebody. I got Maria, I think Pres Maria first, Presbyter Maria. And then I came down and I met with Father Jim and Father Christian and Presbyter Maria, and they had a liturgy that day.
Yeah.
So something spoke to me about it. It wasn't like, oh, this is it. I'll never want anything else. But it just made me want to search more. And I talked to the priests, and I started going to catechism classes. And Deacon Michael was doing those classes. And so it's just one thing after another. The more I learned, the more I yearned to be part of it. And this harkens back, I think, to my Catholic history. I wanted to receive the Eucharist. I wanted the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And the way to do that was to finish becoming a catechumen and to get chrismated and to be able to be part of the Divine Liturgy in the fullest way. And so that was the journey. It took a few years, but I was really only in probably 6 months from the time I understood about, looked into the church to the, and then, became chrismated.
Yeah.
So that was kind of short, but my whole life was really a preparation for that.
Wow. Yeah. When you came to St. George for like your first liturgy there, was there anything in particular that like stood out to you that compelled that search?
That's a good question. I love the visuals in the church, and I love the incense, and I love what they call smells and bells and all that stuff. That was great. And I love what I call pageantry almost, the vestments of the priests and all that. I admit, I was like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end? It just goes on and on. There's
standing for like 3 hours.
A long time. And I wasn't used to standing that long. I'm not really sure. I would read the prayer book. They had the St. John Chrysostom
the
liturgy there, and I would look through that and read it. And I was kind of confused. But I just kept hanging in there, and I just wanted more of that. It just seemed something worth pursuing. And I can't really give you a time when I knew, oh, this is what I want to do. It just never... That search never stopped. I just kept learning more and learning more. And when I realized, I talked to Father Jim and Father Christian about would I need to be baptized. But since I was a baptized Catholic, there was some question about, well, you've been a Baha'i all these years and they don't believe in the Trinity. But I felt like I wanted to honor the baptism that I had, that my parents, provided. I even have the little piece of paper that says I was baptized on July 9th, 1944.
Wow.
So I saw this, I went, no, I was baptized. I just want to be chrismated. So, and I asked Presbyter Maria to be my godmother. She's such a wonderful, wonderful person and a good role model. And she said yes, and Father Christian was the one that was doing the liturgy that day for the Annunciation. I think Father Jim was in Bakersfield. So that I invited my family and my best friend from She lives in Paso Robles, and she is a very, very devoted Catholic. And she'd been praying for me all these years that I'd come back to the faith. Well, I came back to the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, but it was the Orthodox Church. But she's happy for me, and I'm happy for her. So it's just been a great experience, and then just growing from that.
You mentioned that 9/11, like seeing that happen and seeing how it was a consequence of religious violence, how that influenced you a lot. It kind of like drew you away from the Baha'i faith, and also like reading the New Atheist writers, the New Atheist movement, which I'm guessing also like kind of, I haven't read any of them, but I'm guessing they also kind of like comment on that theme. So since like that kind of drew you away, was that like a concern when you're looking back to coming to a new church and eventually finding the Orthodox Church?
I think by the time I was ready to investigate the Orthodox Church, that was not big in my mind. There was a quote from the Baha'i writings: if religion is a source of disunity, it's better not to have it. And obviously, you can't pick one quote out and say that's it. But that's what I did. I went, okay, that's it. This is terrible. This is, they're fighting between Islam and Christianity and whatever else, Judaism, and that hatred there that we're seeing today played out even more. That is kind of, but part of it was my excuse maybe to detach, to get away from things I didn't really believe in so much anymore. But it was a hard time for many of us. But by the time, because this was back in, or so it's 2022 when I first started investigating the Orthodox. So that was, 21 years later. And by then, that wasn't the sole way of looking at it in my life. I just knew I was just dying of thirst. I just needed to have my soul revived. And I was at least smart enough to know that, and to know that anything I had tried along the way. I mean, I felt spiritually connected as a Baha'i for many years, but then as that started to dwindle, and I still can't understand how there's so many good, wonderful spiritual notes in the Baha'i faith. I don't understand where to put that vis-a-vis the Orthodox, because to me the Orthodox Church is the true church. It's the one with the apostolic connection to all the way back, and it just has the preeminence in my mind that as I look at the Baha'i thing, I go, what was I thinking? Because they didn't recognize the resurrection of Jesus. They said it was spiritual, not physical. And as you know, I think it's in St. Paul says, if there's no resurrection, there's no faith. What is this about? And also they didn't ever use the term the Trinity. They saw Christ as lined up with all these other people that I mentioned, all the other prophets or manifestations, but he wasn't preeminent in any way. And now I know that he is the center of my life and the center of the world and the center of creation. And so that is a whole nother way of looking at it. So the things that happened like 9/11 are just part of the process of the world, which is very much affected by evil and the devil and demons and Satan, trying to figure out how to be. And I would rather be on the side of the Christians and the Orthodox connection that I have now.
One of the things you wrote in the description of yourself was that a very central part of your life was this like search for truth, and kind of an intense dedication to that. Why do you think you found yourself so committed to that in life?
Glory to God. I mean, that's just my nature. And so when I became, that's the good part of your nature, searching for truth. The bad part is when you think you have it, thinking you're right and everybody's wrong. Okay. So, when I became Baha'i, I thought there's a lot, I don't know if it's in the teachings, but in my mind, because I was so sincere in searching for the truth, I found it. And I'm a Baha'i, and that's the church, that's the religion. This is their thinking, as far as I understood, is this is going to be the world religion. everyone's going to either be Baha'i or at some point in the future. And they predict another manifestation will come, but not before 1,000 years. So Baha'u'llah was going to be the overarching spiritual figure for a long time, and the world would eventually, after I'm gone, sure, maybe hundreds of years, I don't know, was going to be a Baha'i world. And I felt that because I was rewarded for my sense of searching for the truth. And in some ways I was, because because it gave me a good spiritual grounding for raising my kids and being with my husband and going through the difficult times, But then, now that I'm at the Orthodox faith, I feel that really is the truth. Because before that, I thought I had the truth. And I'm sure when I was in my atheist mode, I thought I had the truth there too. You people that are just clinging on to God, because you can't face life on your own, whatever my other ways of thinking of that was. But now that I see read a lot and read about the fathers and read about the history of the Orthodox Church and went to those classes with Deacon Michael and Father Christian and read all that stuff, it's just clear to me that this is the preeminent way of worshiping and connecting with God. And so and I've learned a lot from people in the church, I'm thinking of Father Christian and Presbyter Maria, to give the glory to God. It's not like, whoa, I'm really smart, I figured this out. It's like God directed me, and I just didn't get it for a while, and it took me a while to get here, but I'm forever grateful because I feel it is the truth I've been searching for all my life.
Do you have any advice for people as we're in this searching journey?
Just to be open. I'm not and to ask God. I say this to other people that are kind of searching. I believe, help my unbelief. And I said that to somebody, and they said, well, I don't believe. I went, okay, that's different. But I believe there's something there. Help my unbelief. And maybe read connecting with the Bible, connecting with prayers is very helpful. And seeing and going to liturgy. I think a lot of I'm kind of an intellectual book person, which I admit can be helpful and is fun, but it can also be detrimental because the most important part is the experience and the connection through the liturgy. I think if you're searching for to know if this is the right religion or if this is where you want to be, you need to go to the liturgy and be part of that and experience that, and also get to know the people and become friendly with people that live this life and do your catechism and read. And I did a lot of online searching. I did different things, just people I like to listen to, and that can be good or bad because there's all different sorts of different stuff. But I feel like the direction I got from Father Christian and Father Jim and the people Deacon Michael and the people that I met, that in some which are recent converts, so that helped me realize this was a good thing to look at. Just tell God you want to know what's going on. Just, God, come to me. Tell me what my life is about. Tell me what I should do with my life. Tell me why I'm here. Give me your love. Let me love you.
I think I relate a lot with the idea of sometimes I find myself wanting to fixate maybe too much on maybe reading a theology book or listening to our theology podcast while going on a walk, whereas a lot of it is the experiential part of it rather than the knowledge you could get from, let's say, a book. And sometimes it's so easy to fixate on that when orthodoxy is a way of life. And so I guess, do you have anything to say to others who find themselves fixating on, the theoretical aspects?
I was thinking about that because that's my nature, to critically read and get all sorts of information and stuff. But it depends where you go. If I'm lately, I've been reading a book by Saint Porphyrius, Wounded by Love. and it's so beautiful, and it's so he just expresses himself so well in terms of the search for Christ and Christ in your life, that to me, it might be considered intellectual, but it's not. It's really spiritual. Yeah. It's not the same as, I just took a class from a man named Sebastian, I can't think of his last name right now, and he, it was called Moses Spoke of Me. And that's a quote from the New Testament, and it was about about the Pentateuch, about the Torah, and it was about the first 5 books of the Bible. So I read all them, and I took the class, and I took the notes, and I took the pictures on my phone when he'd have, and I probably will never go back over that and read it, but I got some gems and gleaned some things about how the prophecies of the Old Testament are fulfilled in Jesus and all that. So that was more of an intellectual side. Yeah. And I don't enjoy that as much as I enjoy reading St. Porphyrius, Wounded by Love, for instance. Yeah. And I made a vow to myself today to do that more. While I was sitting there waiting for you, I thought, this is so rich. And I could read that book more than once and still, I haven't finished it. I'm in the middle of it, and I just keep going back to certain parts because it so explains the world today and how we are if we have Christ in our heart and when we don't have Christ in our heart. And I know both those positions, so I think it's good to connect spiritually. The intellect has to be part of it because we're intellectual beings, and some people are more into that than others. Some of the greatest saints probably couldn't even read or write. We know that was even true in the Catholic faith. Some of the greatest holiest people were not, academically challenging themselves about this. They just had God in their heart and loved him. And to me, that's kind of my avenue, just again, my nature. I didn't create that, I don't think. That's just how God made me.
I'm still thinking about what you said. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. That's just, it's such an amazing saying.
That came up not so long ago in one of the Gospels.
Yeah. Lord,
I believe, help my unbelief, and it was somebody that Jesus had healed. And that's it, because I like that phrase too, because we want it and we think about it, at least, or I do. I want it, but there's more that I have to open my heart to always. And it's a challenge too, we have to give up our own sense of what we think is right. There's a quote from my Catholic background, and now because we honor St. Augustine, love God and do what thy will. Once we have that real sincere connection to God, then we know how to act and we know how to behave. And I just have to keep trying to develop that more and more through prayer and the liturgy and being with people and recognizing how blessed and gifted I am to have been put in this position where I am an Orthodox Christian.
When you were younger, you wanted to become a nun. You wanted to serve God as a nun. What led you to wanting to serve in the monastic life?
I think I was just drawn to it. I remember even as a young kid going to church, and I loved Holy Week. And how arduous Holy Week can be, right? And that was so in the Catholic Church too. And when you're little, when you're in the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, you don't know what's going on, but you just keep repeating these prayers and just being there. And that was always put in my heart, that I wanted to be close to God. And I think a lot of it was the nuns that were teaching me. I became, I idolized them, or I wanted to be like them in some ways. And even though the school I went to in grammar school had a different order of nuns, they were Sisters of Charity. And then when I went to high school, they were called the Sisters of St. Joseph of Newark at that time, which meant Newark, England, not Newark, New Jersey. And I had role models there, and I just, and they call it a vocation, means calling. They call it a calling, or they say it's a calling, and that's what I felt in my heart, that God wanted me to do this, and I wanted to do this. And there could be lots of psychological reasons why one would choose that life at 18. that I won't go into, but I just felt like that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's why I was so crushed when they said no. And then when I came back, that's what I wanted, but it had changed so much that it was, and my thinking had changed so much that I didn't stick with it.
Yeah.
But it was just always something that in my heart I wanted to be like them, sort of, maybe, you know.
Wait, so did you, like, for a brief period end up serving as a nun, or were you, like, about to?
So I was in the novitiate for 3 years, and that's true. You're not serving like a nun. You're barely out of, you don't go in the world very often. You're in this huge building. It's on the Hudson River, St. Michael's, it's called. And then I left probably just, I think I left a month or two before what they now give you your first vows.
Yeah.
And before that you have a white veil, and then when you get to first vows you get your black veil, and that's when you go in, you leave the novitiate and you go teach somewhere or be a nurse. They were mostly teaching and nursing as professions. And so when I went back the second time, I stayed in the novitiate one more year. Not really sure why exactly, but I was there and I met some really nice people, different people, a couple of years different than the ones I had known. And then they sent me down to St. James in Pennsgrove, New Jersey, to teach religion. So I was fully a nun in service down there teaching at St. James. And in the meantime, when I had left, or when they asked me to leave, I taught for 2 years in one of their schools. I taught 7th and 8th grade in a place called Fair Lawn, New Jersey. I didn't know what I was doing Hop Day. I had had no teacher preparation. That would have come later. That's not what I, was. By that time I had an AA degree. I hadn't gone back to college to get my BA. So I did that for 2 years, which just kind of with the nuns. So that made me want to do it even more. So then when I went back in as a nun, stayed for a year in the novitiate, and then went down and taught for a year. And that's when the prompting came to just, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I used to listen to Bob Dylan, so I was kind of more into the music than most people at that time. And there was a song, something about, something's happening, you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? And that's me. Something's happening and I don't know what it is, but I can't stay here anymore. And so that's when I left, and a whole nother series, my life, like I started coming out to California, but it was just in my heart, and then it wasn't, I didn't manufacture it, and I felt bad because a lot of nuns were leaving at the time, and I wanted to be one that held on, but it just didn't seem the right thing to do. You want to know something interesting? I just looked up the old order that I was at. I went online the other day. And I came from a high school called St. Luke's High School in Hohokus, New Jersey. And 5 of us entered the convent in 1962. There's 3 of my friends are still there. They just got their 60-year jubilee a couple of years ago. 3 out of the 5 are still there. And if I hadn't been kicked out the first time, I probably would still be there too, because then I would have been more in their, level of thinking and understanding, not the thing that happened 2 years later, which was really different. So that blew me away. I went, oh my gosh, Lucy and Susan and Nora are still there.
Wow.
60 years.
That's amazing.
I'd have no kids. I'd have no grandkids. I'd have no husband. And that's all a blessing in my life, of course. So God knew better than I did, for sure.
Yeah. Or are there any things you learned from there that you still apply today?
I think so. A sense of discipline, a sense of being able to be quiet, we would have retreats where we wouldn't talk for 8 days, and being able to, pray, being able to honor delighting in going to the chapel and church and all that, and also not always delighting when it's 5:30 or 6 in the morning and your head's bowing because you're tired and you're saying the office, like what we call matins and vespers here, they would call the office. And I think a lot of it was discipline. It was the idea that God brought joy to your heart, and that Christ was a wonderful light in my life, and my attention to Mary there, or my devotion to Mary, probably developed more there. But then I let go of it when for many years. Sorry, Mary, but she knows. She helped me out. She's always there somewhere. So. But I think a lot of, just taking care of cleaning things, taking care of the things you have to do in life, because we always had chores that we did, and they'd switch every 6 weeks, and we'd do something else, and being responsible, being quiet, not it just wasn't a self-centered or narcissistic way of living at all. You were always trying to be respectful and honorable and prayerful, and just a different kind of life, for sure.
Yeah, I cannot imagine not talking for 8 days.
I bet that would be hard, yeah.
Yeah. And your 2 periods where, so your first one, you kind of where you drifted away from Catholicism, and also the period when you left Baha'i and became atheist. Is there much overlap in those 2 periods you had where you're atheist, or were they vastly different?
Well, yeah, that's a good question too. That's just kind of my fallback position. If I can't figure out what to be, I'll say the heck with all of it. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to be anything. But I had to justify that in my mind. I couldn't just, again, my intellectual part comes in. I'm reading all this stuff. Well, what do you think? And what do you think? And what do you think? And some of that stuck with me. And you can kind of be convinced just about anything if you have enough influence coming that way. And this was, of course, before the internet or anything like that. But I think that's hard for me to put myself in that position if I were the same, because I felt like, say, between the years of, let's see, I became a Baha'i in 77, so maybe 72 or 3 to 75 or 6. I was in my atheist mode, and then from maybe 2001 to maybe 2000, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years there, because I didn't come to there was a long time where I didn't know what to believe, and so the second period seemed to last longer, and yet I was a Baha'i the whole time. I never withdrew from that. And like I said, I was faithful to the Baha'i faith, did what I was supposed to. Then I left and didn't do too much for a couple of years, and then came back. So that was a long period. But I just couldn't figure out what the real truth was. And so I just kind of went along with, the culture or society or whatever. And again, thinking I knew better, because I was an atheist, and you peons don't know that there's no God, and again, feeling justified in my own sense. I think that's again, I started to say before, a sense in the Orthodox religion of humility, that I'm not creating all this necessarily, that God's in charge, and that he kind of directs us along a path, and it's sort of easier to see as you look back. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't really understand where you're going or why you're going. And a lot of times just make bad choices, self-centered choices, choices that the passions lead you, or your upsetment with other people, or your need to be right, or all sorts of things make you not as willing to follow the will of God, or not even understanding the will of God a lot of times. So I think we're in a crisis like that now, where there's where culture tells us it's all about me, what I want and how I want to do it, and there's no parameters, they're just against everything, and that's obviously doesn't work. You just look at the world and see that it's not very useful. So, can I share something in a book?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Right. Oh, I was just reading this while I was waiting for you, and this is the Wounded by Love book by St. Porphyrios. It says, when Christ enters your heart, your life changes. Christ is everything. Whoever experiences Christ within himself experiences ineffable things, holy and sacred things. And then go down a little. When Christ enters your heart, your passions disappear. You are unable to swear, hate, or seek revenge or anything. How could there be any hatreds, dislikes, censures, egotisms, anxieties, and depressions? What holds sway is Christ and longing for the unsetting light. Now, the opposite, which what we're living through, when you don't live with Christ, however, you live immersed in melancholy, affliction, anxiety, and vexation or anger. And is that not true of today? The anxiety and the anger and the upsetment and the depression, it's just, they talk about it all the time, about what's happening, especially to youth, which is so sad. And so Christ is the answer. And it just took me a while to get to have that, to have him centered in my life. And not that I'm at this point, because I still have some of those feelings, but I want to be attached enough to Christ that it is hard to do something that would be against him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
See why I like this book?
Yeah.
Wounded by
Love.
And
I hope to read it.
That. Yeah, he talks about that.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
Here, it's yours. I'll get another one. Oh, really? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Let me take my stuff out of it. You can have it.
Really?
Yeah, I'll just order another one for me.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. There's one more. It'll take a while for you to get through it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow.
Have you ever heard of Paul Kingsnorth?
Paul Kingsnorth, no.
He's a Orthodox. He has a whole history of coming through Protestant upbringing, Wiccan, occultist, and then he became a Christian, and then he became a Orthodox Christian. And he's the one that said that was his favorite book.
Yeah.
So when I heard him say that, I checked it out because I like Paul Kingsnorth.
Sometimes it does feel like in today, like, where maybe a lot of it is how the media portrays it, but a lot of it's in actuality. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like we're about to go to war. A lot of places are in war, and like it feels like there's a lot of chaos going on.
It certainly seems so, and it's always been so, I'm sure, if you look back at history. It's just that the odds are great. Or, no, that's not what I want to say. The fact that we have nuclear weapons and the weaponry and all that makes it a little bit more difficult to deal with. You know, I was listening to about the presidents in the past, and we were just listening to a tape about it, and there was so much nonsense going back in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth president of the United States. There were things that you went, whoa, if anybody did that today, that'd be awful. Yeah. But they didn't have the same kind of media. Although even then the media was against certain things, you know, anyway, they had their positions. But yeah, it's just much more onerous now that the ability to wipe people out is possibility. So. And again, it's not. I think that's one of my biggest faults is getting caught up in that and wanting to learn about it and take a side and be angry at the people who have the other side. And I just really have to keep reminding myself, like, read this more than you're watching that, you know, because this is what's going to keep you grounded. And none of that's in our control. That's one of the things that, as you get older, hopefully I understand the things that I have some control over and the things that I don't, and not to fret and worry about the things I have no control over, and do the best I can with what I do have.
The passage you shared, it reminds me of, there's this part in one of the Gospels, I forgot which one, where Christ is saying something about, given that the Father clothes the flowers with such beauty, think of what he'll clothe you with. And also I don't know if this was in the same part or if this was in a different part, but like to not really worry about like tomorrow's concerns, because of because God will be there, and like to like rely on Christ is to recognize that you don't need to have those concerns.
That is the same passage. They talk about the lilies of the field and the sparrows and the hairs on your head, and then it says, be content with the anxieties of today because tomorrow will take care of itself. There's enough to handle today. That's true. Yeah. There's another quote I used to know. I don't know if I know it, about be not anxious. With prayer and thanksgiving, give thanks to God, and He will. It's in Philippians, I think. My son Ian's much better at this stuff, knowing the Bible, than I am. But be content with what you have, and understand that Christ is there to guard and keep your heart. And that's the quote where it comes to the peace that passes understanding will be yours if you don't be anxious. And that's a big thing today, anxiety, I think. And that's a big thing that again, worrying about things you have no control over and just giving it to God is, how they say, which really I've found that a tremendous gift from getting back into a religious life, really, to get back into a connection with God and Christ, to understand that He's in control, I'm not, and I can do the best that I can, but I can't worry. Be anxious today for the things of today, not for tomorrow, because they're not here yet. So,
how do you think marriage and family in general influenced your religious search?
I think that's an interesting way of putting that, how it affected my... I think being a Baha'i was comforting for marriage and family, because it gave me a blueprint, in a way, spiritual blueprint, to raise my children, telling them about God and telling them that we're to not be prejudiced, to accept all religions, but that we felt that the teachings of Baha'u'llah were the ones for today. It kept me... I don't think I would be married today if I wasn't a Baha'i. I don't know if I should say that, but there were many times you're married to somebody and there's strife and there's upsetment, and I would go back in my room and I would say prayers and I would say, no, this is my responsibility to stay married, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to, they would just say, love your husband, and I would try to love my husband, and it wasn't always easy, and I'm sure he loving me wasn't always easy. We have been married 48 years, and we have a really, really deep and wonderful relationship that was forged through all of that. There used to be a quote I liked about the jewels, you have to rub off the rocks and the gems in order to get them to shine and be jewel-like. And that's all the upsetments that we come up with along our lives, and all the tests that we have, and carrying the cross of Christ and all that's meant to make us better people, I think. And so I'm so pleased with my family. I'm just so blessed and happy that we're connected, that we love each other, that we share time together when we can, that we respect each other's differences, and just have a good time being together. And I'm just so blessed in that respect. And a lot of that has the basic root of loving God.
How does your past experience of being Baha'i, how did that influence your encounter with Orthodoxy?
I'm not sure how it influenced it. I think because I was sort of detaching from that at the time, I again was in a situation of spiritual bereftness. I didn't have a connection. And so I became Baha'i after feeling lost and spiritually adrift, right? And then when I felt that way toward the end of that part of my life, when I became Orthodox, again, it was a search for that connection. A search to fill that God-sized hole, they call it, in your heart, right? And in your being. And so in that respect, it was similar. I think that whole, just missing God, we're meant to be connected to our Creator. And when you deny that, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to be fulfilled. You can find things that make you feel okay in the meantime, I think. But for me, there was just always something missing. And I tried. I've read, Seraphim Rose, a lot of his journey. I did a lot of the New Age stuff. Even though I was kind of into the Baha'i Faith and doing that, I would still look for other things, and I'd read other books that were kind of New Agey and The Secret and all that kind of stuff. And so I was searching while I was searching. But now that I'm Orthodox, I'm not searching for anything else within that. I don't have cards that I look at every day to see what animal I am today, or little things that I used to do before, mystical little things, or just things that I would do to try to connect to something, but it wasn't as whole and significant and the whole thing that connecting to Christ through the Orthodox faith is. So the searching was there, which I think if we kind of quiet ourselves, for everybody is there. If God's calling you to himself, it just seems like people don't always hear it. And I didn't hear it always myself, or didn't hear it in the way that I hear it now. But I think both journeys were trying to get back to understanding who I am and how I am connected to God, and God's connected to me. Let me show you something else.
Okay.
Real quick. The prayer rule of the Theotokos. Have you ever heard of it?
I've never heard of it.
It's from, I think this actually comes from Seraphim of Seraph, Saint Seraphim of
Seraph.
Yes, and he just has this prayer, and this is just a beautiful book because it has all the different feast days and recognitions of Mary. But there's this prayer rule, and it's a short prayer, and so I say a rosary with that, and I use actually a rosary that I found, rosary beads that were in things that I got. It was my father's rosary beads.
Is that similar to the Orthodox prayer rope?
It is, except that there's a cross, and then there's a space, and there's 3 beads, and then a space, and then you have 10 beads and a space, and 1 bead, and 10 beads and a space, and they do it with the mysteries of the rosary that they have. Now in the Orthodox, they tell you not to visualize things and not to have stories going in your head necessarily, which is a little hard for me because I'm used to the other, but I just say, I try to do that prayer rosary once a day if and offer it up to different, for different intentions. But that's another connection to Mary that I have that I really like. Rejoice, O Virgin Theotokos, Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. For thou hast borne Christ, the Savior of our souls. That's it. And then I might add the end of the Hail Mary sometimes, and sometimes I don't. But you just say that 50 times. And actually, he recommends 150 times, but I don't always do that long. Anyway, so this is just the prayer rule of the Theotokos that I really appreciate, and I'm glad I found.
Yeah.
Just from looking up stuff on Amazon somehow, I don't know, I got the card, but so she's very special in my life.
I think we're getting close to the end, so what's the question you think the viewer leaving this discussion should ask themselves?
Well, since this is all about kind of investigation of truth, I think they should ask themselves if they are satisfied with the truth they found in their life, and if not, what avenues should they pursue to try to come to a certainty in their lives that what they believe is true and is honoring God and honoring themselves. So I think that might be it. Or how, if they have the truth, I'm thinking Orthodox people will be watching this, how they can better serve the faith and how they can better get closer to God. I mean, that's our journey. What theosis is to become saints. How they can better become a saint. That's what we're all striving for. And so you can see my journey, that it took a while, and maybe look at it and say, okay, patience is worth having too, because you never know, and just acknowledging that God's at work in our lives.
Would you like to end in a prayer?
Sure. I'm just going to say the Our Father.
Okay.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen.